In light of the confusion swirling around the NFL players' protests, I thought this might be a moment to reflect. Veterans Day falls on a Saturday this year, so it will be observed this Friday, the 10th of November, a federal holiday. I am often reminded of the military's historic presence here whenever I pass by the old armory at 901 Main Street. The 1895 two-story administrative building with a one-story drill hall fortress-like style was designed by architect Isaac G. Perry and features a 4.5-story round tower at the southwest corner and a 3-story round tower at the northwest corner, which have captured my imagination since I was a kid. Like most of us, I have family members from every generation who fought in just about every war that America has been involved in since the Revolution, but it is surprising how little we actually know about some of the men and women of color who made it possible for the rest of us to live the lives we enjoy today. I have mentioned much of the following before, but it bears repeating every year, especially now. There has not been a single war fought by or within the United States in which African Americans did not participate. That includes the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, the Mexican-American War, the Civil War, in which my great-grandfather, Luther C. Todd, fought on the Union side, the Spanish-American War, the World Wars, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Gulf War, and the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, as well as in other minor conflicts around the world. Today, the military is one of the nation's largest employers, with approximately 1.3 million personnel on active duty, 756,000 civilians, and 824,000 men and women in the selected reserve of National Guard and Reserve Forces. According to their own reports, our military service members and civilians operate in every time zone and in every climate, and more than 450,000 employees serve overseas, and there also are more than 2 million military veterans and service-related retirees and family members receiving benefits today. It is not well known that the military history of African Americans stretches all the way from the arrival of the first black slaves during the colonial history of the United States to today and beyond. There are some resources available for those who have the time and money to do the level of research necessary to dig out the details of our family's military past. One of the more friendly sites is maintained by the Library of Congress, which hosts something called the Veterans History Project, a cost-free site which includes a section called African Americans at War, Fighting Two Battles, shedding light on the peculiar predicaments that black soldiers often faced besides the enemy. And, of course, African warriors, historically known as being amongst the deadliest, fiercest fighters in the world, existed long before they arrived as slaves captive on America's shores. But back here on the American home front, during the American Revolution, seeking and gaining freedom was the strongest motive for black slaves who fought on either side of the war. Some historians estimate that as many as 10,000 patriots, including soldiers in the Continental Army and Navy, state militia units, privateers, wagoneers, servants, and spies joined the Loyalist cause. And who can forget the history lesson we all learned in grade school that Crispus Attucks, a black man, was shot dead by British soldiers in the Boston Massacre in 1770. One excellent source of information on the colored Corps, African Canadians in the War of 1812, is available at a Canadian website, 1812.ca. Referring to blacks in early Upper Canada, the site claims that the first substantial settlement of African Canadians in Upper Canada occurred following the American Revolution. Some, such as Richard Pierpoint, a former slave from Africa and military veteran of Butler's Rangers, had gained their freedom under the British Crown during the late war. According to the site, most were slaves brought to the province as spoils of war or as the property of Loyalist refugees. Lieutenant Governor John Graves Simcoe's attempts to abolish slavery were opposed by the Canadian legislature, concerned over the possible economic impact. His so-called Act Against Slavery, passed on July 9, 1793, banned a further importation of slaves into Upper Canada, but granted freedom automatically only to those born in the province. Consequently, Many African Canadians occupied an uneasy and caste-like status within early Upper Canadian society. Probably the most well-known references to Black or African American soldiers today include the Tuskegee Airmen, the popular name of that group of African American World War II fighter and bomber pilots who formed the 332nd Fighter Group and the 477th Bombardment Group of the U.S. Army Air Forces, and the Buffalo Soldiers, the United States. The Tuskegee Airmen were the first African-American military aviators in the United States Armed Forces. Prior to their arrival, Black Americans were subject to racial segregation and the Jim Crow laws that reached across America, including the federal government. One of the most fascinating stories about African American military history surrounds the so-called Buffalo Soldiers. Originally members of the United States 10th Cavalry Regiment of the United States Army, formed on September 21, 1866 at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, the nickname Buffalo Soldiers was given to the Negro cavalry by the Native American tribes they fought. The term, which is said to also include the 9th and 10th Cavalry Regiment as well as the 24th and 25th Infantry Regiments, eventually became synonymous with all of the African American regiments formed in 1866. Several African American regiments were raised during the Civil War as part of the Union Army, including the 54th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry and the many United States Colored Troops regiments. The Buffalo Soldiers were established by Congress as the first peacetime all-black regiments in the regular U.S. Army. While there remains widespread disagreement over the origin of the term Buffalo Soldiers, according to the Buffalo Soldiers National Museum, the name originated with the Cheyenne warriors in the winter of 1877, the actual Cheyenne translation being Wild Buffalo. In any event, the term Buffalo Soldiers became a generic term for all black soldiers. It is now used for United States Army units that trace their direct lineage back to the 9th and 10th Cavalry units whose service earned them an honored place in U.S. history. Take a moment to remember what they're fighting for and thank a veteran for their service to America. Also, take time to know the military veterans in your own family.